Can I just say that, what you asked what we got out of this meeting, and I'll just throw it out.
Oh.
Besides,
Baptism.
Oh, God. No, no. Does that mean he's all wet? Anyway, what worked for me, probably, the one thing that I got more than anything is, because like everybody, you work in a field for a certain amount of time and you say, okay, am I going to continue? And, because we go through this all the time, let's move on, let's do something else. And I'm afraid that we're kind of stuck. Is every so often we think that we're going to move on and do something else, and what we keep doing is saying, well, why don't we do a film about such and such? And it keeps coming back to the environment, because we did about 200 films that had nothing to do with the environment, and we keep thinking, okay, let's go back, and but I guess in a certain way, there's no going back. Once something gets under your skin, as much as you would like to occasionally or think you want to move on. So I think what I got from here was somewhat of a renewed energy to continue in the field that we are. And I'm not saying that we're going to continue it the same way. We may, but it's certainly the desire to continue. And for that, I do thank you all.
Next. I think Marilyn has begun the process of
Conversion.
telling us what you've experienced or what's transformed. So, Mary Evelyn, did you?
No, I was just talking to
Oh.
an insect here.
That's helpful.
So let's just open it up, and Galen will keep a note of time so that we finish up in an appropriate time. Anyone else want to say anything? Bear?
I'll volunteer. I'm kind of late coming to global climate change as something that I wanted to deal with as an environmental philosopher. I think I was I was skeptical not about the facts of global climate change, but that it was the sort of thing that we should really be that concerned about, because I looked at the graphs, and there's always been climate change in the past. And I was thinking about, well, in the distant future, intelligent beings, if there are any, might look back on us and say, well, hey, these guys recycled all of this sequestered carbon. And Jim Lovelock, in his first book on the Gaia hypothesis, was worried about climate change going in the opposite direction, namely towards global cooling, because of the sequestering of carbon. So I just sort of thought, well, if we look at it in these larger terms, why should we really be concerned about it? And it was only some further reflection about the pace of the changes that in respect to those of the past that finally got my attention and raised this issue to the level that this is really what I ought to be devoting what few talents I have as an environmental philosopher to address. And this meeting has been extremely important to me because it enables me to join a community of which I had not been a member. I must know 100 ecologists, but I know 2 people in climate science, Michael McElroy at Harvard and now Jeff. And so it's been, for me, this week has been very, very important simply because I'm I have now a network of colleagues with whom I can work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Excuse me for interrupting, but maybe, and I appreciate wanting to take the time, but we did try to say that we would try to have a challenge in communication of putting our thoughts into very short summary, 2 minutes. Difficult challenge to do, but I'd like to try to work with that, because I know people are also looking to leave and want to keep it moving. So.
That's great, Barry.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I'll take what is it, 2 or 3 minute challenge?
Yeah.
2 minutes. Let's talk very fast. We've talked about metaphor and needing new metaphor. And the question of metaphor has interested me for about 20 years. I've done a lot of work on that. I was really hoping to get to say that in the talk that I gave. It's not that we just need new metaphors, but we have to learn to live and think metaphorically. So I'd like to throw that out, and if anybody's interested in knowing what that means, I'd be happy to share that with you. I can send that part of the paper that I didn't finish. Okay, second thing. One of the things in the conference that has really impressed me is the struggle that all of us are undergoing to connect head and heart, however you want to phrase that. And I was sitting there today and I made a Freudian slip, Al, Freudian slip. I wrote the word heard, and if you look at it, it combines head and heart. The journey from here to here is very short if you measure it empirically. But from here to here, in terms of how we live, is a very difficult journey, and it ends in the mouth. So our language, how we speak in a way that combines head and heart, is really important. Finally, there's a great book by an Australian novelist, An Imaginary Life, David Malouf, where he talks about what happened to the Roman poet Ovid when he was exiled. He was a man who was brilliant, intellectual. He made his life by writing poems and criticisms of the emperor. And he's exiled, and he learns to speak in a new way to a wild boy who teaches him that the language of the head has to be integrated by listening to nature. And I think that's our biggest challenge. Are we really responding to something that is larger than ourselves? Which brings us back to the question of a religious sensibility. Earth, isn't this what you want, Rilke says, an invisible re-arising in us? How does our language respond to the way the earth is calling us to speak? Are we being faithful to it or not? I think we have to be very careful about how eco-psychology can slip into an ego-psychology. So I just want to end with that. Under 2 minutes.
Great.
Sure.
I hope even quicker. I have a tendency to be very critical of human beings when it comes to environmental issues. Everything from my neighbor who will, in spite of the fact that we're trying very hard to keep organic matter out of the lakes, will shove all of her fall leaves into the street. You know, all these little acts that I see as I walk through my environment, and it just drives me nuts. And so I have a tendency to become very, very critical of people. And so perhaps the best thing that's happened to me this week is that you've all kind of renewed my my hope and my confidence in my fellow human beings, because what I know now is if I just dig enough into an individual, I can find that bit of sanity that will help me communicate and help me work with people. And so, which I think is absolutely critical in any of these efforts. So for me, this is just an opportunity to renew my confidence in my fellow person. Okay.
I'll go next. When I arrived on Wednesday, it was daunting because I felt that so much had already transpired. And I think the theme for me of this whole experience has been paying attention. And I realized that I do pay attention, but only to very specific things. I pay attention to science, I pay attention to news and to journalists, but I realized that through listening to you that I ought to be paying more attention to dreams and to what is not said, as well as what is said. And I really, it was like a little bolt of electricity when John Grimes said, attentive relationship to the earth. And then I was really struck too by the vision of Karl Rove taking this paper and pushing it off to the side, refusing to look and pay attention. And Bush's, when asked, would he see an inconvenient truth, saying probably not. And so I think that really focusing on paying attention is for me that what I will take away, and I will try to pay attention to opportunities to make connections between all of these different dimensions in the work that I am doing. And I guess it comes down to being a better listener. And everybody's got a lot to say, but sometimes we aren't as good at hearing. And the other thing I will really remember is that magpie sitting behind us, and that magpie had something to say. And it was a joiner. There was all this stuff going on here. That magpie was just, really, and so I will hold that thought to encapsulate all this as I go. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Coming out of the Jungian community, I've learned a lot about the environment that I did not know and had not been paying attention to before I came here. So there are a lot of books that I'll be reading, and also we'll be incorporating a lot of these themes in my teaching. When I teach Jungian psychology and psychotherapy, I will definitely include these issues with my students. Which I've not done before. So that's a big shift for me. On the other hand, what I felt was really lacking, and I'm really saying this as an observer because I wasn't really part of the conference. As a Jungian, I felt that there was not nearly enough contextualizing for people who are not Jungians Jung's ideas way beyond psychotherapy about psyche and nature. And I felt that was a real lack. And, Jung did a major turnabout later in his life, especially through his work on synchronicity, which really brought psyche and nature together. It moved his whole idea from the soul being inside to the soul being a field outside that we participate in. So his whole alchemy studies was based on the idea that the Christian notion, Jewish, Judeo-Christian tradition of a God up in the sky was just way off, that God was in the human psyche and in nature. And I felt that that perspective could really have contributed to bringing soul issues and environmental issues together in a really profound way, and I miss that here. So.
I'd just like to say that I want to echo something that Mitch said yesterday and that Ellen said this morning about community, and that's what I feel has been really important here. It's not the outcomes that we can see, the material outcomes or the intellectual outcomes. It's a sense of community and even a sense of changing consciousness this week for everybody in just a little way that will contribute in the long run, and we'll take that back to our lives in very different places. And I thank you for being able to be here and be stimulated by you and to also participate.
After the first few hours on Monday, I really felt like Salieri in his criticism of Mozart. Salieri said too many notes, and I said too many words. And what happened over the week was that it was really great because it has been about 45, 50 years since I've been in school. So that all of a sudden my brain started working in ways that it did many years ago. And that part of our gathering, I thought, was the most exciting thing for me, is to remember what it was like to be cerebral in thought. And that was really great. At the end of 5.5 days, I still feel like Salieri. But not as a criticism of my new friends, but as a filmmaker, I just feel as if there's too many words. Yesterday was the first time that I had a chance to look at this, a little bit of the body of work we were doing, and it's too many words. And you know, Marilyn indicates that we're getting a bit tired, and I know that I'm getting really tired of saying the same thing over and over again. So what this group has done is sort of stimulated me as a creative person to just find new ways of expressing how we feel about the environment. I don't know what that new way is, but the show in April will be old news. We're committed to sticking with our style. But after that, we're definitely searching for new ways that also can get funded and that will give us bigger audiences. So we can reach these kids over here, because that really is most important. But I thank you for reinforcing the fact that Salieri wasn't a bad guy in many ways.
Just two thoughts, one on the workshop itself and then another on words, so it's like me. In response to too many words, I think a workshop like this, when we have an opportunity to be together for a week, would really benefit from more direct experience in the outdoors. That's guided, and it could be a wonderful combination of traditional natural history and ecology, as well as perhaps dream work, writing, art, whatever it might be. But there were too many words for me, and it was too cerebral. And again, I greatly value what happened, so I don't mean to be critical in that regard. But we talk too much about things that we need to directly experience. And the true fulcrum here is the direct experience of natural history and the empirical relationships that are so crucial, linked to a greater sense of self through art, metaphor, imagination, that we actually do together. So if something like this were to happen again, I'd strongly recommend that. In terms of where I've wound up, and David Orr's presentation yesterday, I can't say why, David, because I've seen all those things before, but it really shocked me into a new reality. There were things that I've already known, but maybe it was the combination of seeing the stripped mountaintop with Katrina next to the Bible and the Founding Fathers that made me get an even greater appreciation for the sheer necessity and urgency of political organizing. If you look at all the political change that's occurred throughout the world in the last 100 years, it's always been the sheer masses of people working together, finding new coalitions, reaching out, and finding, whatever it is, a common language, a common hope, a common aspiration. And we just need to do so much better at that, all of us, each and every one of us. And so that's what I'm taking away from it, that the political arena is just absolutely crucial in whatever way we can make that happen. I feel inspired to do more of that as a result of this. How did that happen? But I feel inspired to do more of that as a result of this conference.
Can I pick up on that? And when Hal was talking about cerebral, I mean, what we've done with our meetings here over the years is interdisciplinary, but it's very cerebral. And it actually puts me in a place of seeing global environmental change from many different angles, which lead you in the cerebral sense to think it's actually much worse than what David Orr showed when you take in all the angles of it. And in doing this recent thing that we did with the local community about climate change and the impacts and reaching out to stakeholders and so on, and thinking about how the body of science just keeps growing and getting more refined and more developed about global environmental change, and this nagging feeling that knowledge is not going to get the job done. And so for me, this meeting was like the answer to that, and not that it's a complete answer. It's more like a start. It's more like an exploration of what we need to do to go beyond the kind of knowledge base about how the global environment works. And it includes many ingredients, including what you were talking about in terms of what the invisible side, what you talked about, but also I think the political action and the community building, the organizing, these kinds of things, I think, are where, as you're saying, movement takes place. When the people, whatever that is, decide to do something different. And that comes from many directions. So for me anyway, it's been a wonderful education.
Thanks. Maria?
Well, just to pick up on that and maybe some other comments. I was really struck a number of years ago at this seminar at NYU on Islam. This is quite a few years ago, but Franz Rosenthal came down from Yale, and he's one of the great scholars of Islam, and he was talking about the how extraordinarily complex and sophisticated it was in its medieval period, and of course how passed on learning to the West, and Renaissance happened as a result. And so we were asking him, well, what happened, to Islamic civilization? And many people talk about China the same way. But I do think there's a civilizational component here that we, can focus on. And what he said, I will never forget. He said, Islam drowned in too much knowledge, in its own complexity. And I thought, my God, that is really something. And I'm picking up on what John said, because I think the message that we all get here, from your talk right through, Jeff, from the beginning, is we have more than enough knowledge on all kinds of fronts, from climate change to beginning to get more the restoration knowledge and so on, but we've got an immense amount of expertise. We have extraordinary expertise. And we've got white papers, and we've got blue papers, and we've got action reports, and we've got statements from the world's religions somewhere. And we have almost everything in place to make a civilizational shift. And we can say we don't have the political will, and that's true, and I think David Orr's, constantly brings back to the rhetoric that needs to come into place. But it strikes me, and we've said it from many different points of view, we're in the midst of this sense where we're no longer, we know this isn't a mechanistic universe. The sciences are giving us all kinds of evidence of that. We know it, we feel it, we sense it, we vibrate with it. So we're beginning to get in a new, what Paul Ricoeur would say, a second naivete of the aliveness of the universe, of the engaged, interactive, dynamic forces that we're in the midst of. But we haven't quite gotten ourselves to this sense of, so how do we participate in it? How do we celebrate with it, work with it, partner with it, and all of that kind of thing? And Joel Primack's new book, the Voice from the Center,
View from the Center.
The View from the Center, is suggesting, along with what Brian Swim's been doing for a long, long time, that we're symbol-making animals, clearly. And this is the Jungian component, for sure. We have not fully symbol-made ourselves connected to this live, vibrant world. The nature writers have done a lot of this for us, but we've not actually taken in how are we related to tectonic plates? How are we related to the rise of the granite top mountains? How are we related to these geological, huge, complex processes? And how are we related to the emergence of the universe itself? And I think that symbolic making capacity of the human that we're just on the edge of has huge potential to light a fire of the transformation for a civilizational new sensibilities of all kinds. And I think there's lots of people in this room who share that, sense it, and who knows what those embers will create.
Thank you.
Picking up on these things, yeah, it almost feels like, well, what we're needing is a sense of it becoming a supersaturated solution that can just some tiny little click turn over. And I think that happens from us just speaking face to face with friends, colleagues, friends, family, but speaking differently, not speaking just quite in the same way. Maybe it's partly about metaphor, about poetics, about story, telling story, So some of the key threads that have gone in deepest in me is linking, hearing the echoes from the scientific brothers and sisters here, a sense of a yearning in them for a science that is in some way grounded and not alien to their direct and felt experience. And direct experience is, of course, always local. And from Kathleen and others, hearing this call for a new morality grounded in quotidian, simple relationships with family, neighbors, places. From Mary Evelyn, hearing a new multiform planetary civilization grounded in a diversity of local, place-based, or that's how I was hearing it, place-based vernacular cultures tuned to the pulse and rhythm of particular places. So this call toward the local, Andrew's insistence on civic renewal, just getting engaged where you are, that is in the face-to-face. So I'm hearing a lot, feeling a lot of that, and taking that with me, and also that a sense that the local is, we have the broader media that reach us in wider ways, but the original medium is the air, and speech face-to-face is just shaped breath, as all our indigenous ancestors spoke of it, and just beginning to talk and engage the air again, and floating again, just this simple sense that maybe the mind or the psyche is not ours, it's Earth's. And it's not that it's in us, but we're in it, along with the other animals and the plants, and that it's somehow very akin to the air and the atmosphere of this place, which after all is the very origin of the word psyche, which meant the wind and the breath.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate being able to spend the week with all of you and to make some new connections myself. Because I am working in such a local context right here in these mountains, it's really inspirational for me to have all of you come here and to find ways of linking my local work to these broader conversations that are going on, and consider how I can sort of boil them down into meaningful things that I can use in my work to help people make those local connections. And as I think about, the next 10 years ahead of me, I'm going to bring that, the ideas I've been hearing forward with me in the educational ways that I do my work. And I just wanted to sort of touch on what you said about the magpie. The flicker here has been cheering all week. And for me, the flicker is a symbol of spring and freshness, and arrives when the snows just melt. So whenever I think of the flicker, I'm going to think of this group and the things that have been discussed this week, and continue to move forward with that idea and the ideas I've gained here. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
The magpie's the cynic.
It's really been wonderful for me to be here. I'm so thankful for Pink Floyd. I got home last night, had done everything, got in bed. Well, let's just see what's on TV. Public TV fundraiser, Pink Floyd. Good signs. But one thing that I have long felt is the knowledge and the problems are so complex that the best we can do is each really develop an area that's close to our hearts, and then go out and talk and dialogue with people that really are open to dialogue and sharing ideas and feelings. And I think we've done a lot of that this week, and I hate to see this group break up. It's just been so dear at so many levels. Two things though. My question I wanted to ask to these young people, and I tried it afterwards. was if they're aware of the powers that are aligned against them. And for me, the particular example is, and this is what is forcing me to think a little harder and deeper, since we only have 10 or 20 years, is the mental health profession and the HMOs. If you see a person more than 5 hours, no matter how sick they are, you're probably going to be dropped from a provider panel, which means you have to do some cognitive behavioral stuff really quickly. If that doesn't work, you're going to get psychotropic medications. There are people that go into the medical professions, work their butts off, best of intentions, and they end up working for an HMO. All they can do is push pills. And they know that's not helping, not doing any good. So we have these powerful systems, the corporations, the capitalistic mentality, all that sort of stuff. What types of changes? Of course we have to connect with nature, we have to be aware of the problems and all that sort of stuff. But we're going to have to change the systems that no matter what our intents and how deeply connected we are with nature, we're going to have to think and come up with some basic stuff. And I think it still may come down to Carl Sagan saying, unless we develop a sense of the sacred, something that at some very deep level is connected to the earth and is the foundation of who we are, that determines what we have to do and whatever systems we have to break up to do it.
Tony?
Let's see. I guess two main things. First of all, this has just been an incredibly powerful personal journey in some ways. And I've been really struck over the past couple of days about how compartmentalized my life has been, in the sense that I've lived in different places and I've known different people and I've done different things at different parts of my life, like we all have, and they've been separate chapters. You know, it was chapter 1, and then there was chapter 2, and then there was chapter 3, and all of a sudden I got invited to this thing that brought all these separate chapters together into one big group. And it's been a very strange experience, but I feel like all the chapter numbers have been erased. All the boundaries between the chapters have been dissolved. And suddenly I've got all these different parts of my life that were more or less separate have suddenly just been like fused together in some new, interesting way. And I'm not sure what's yet going to come out of it, but I feel in that sense kind of it's not a rebirth, but it is kind of a birth. So I guess thank you for that transformation. The other is back to a question I think was raised the very first day, and that was, how do we deal with despair? And I've been playing with that idea for much of the week, and I keep coming back to one of the ways that I think I deal with it. And it's something that we just don't talk about very often in the environmental movement, and that's faith. And by that I don't mean religious faith. It could be religious faith, but that's not what I'm getting at. It's the faith that there are other people out there who care as much as you do and who are working as hard as you are. And not only currently, but in the future. That, yes, I'm spitting in the wind, doing my little tiny bit that's, going to be insignificant in the great scheme of things, but there will be millions of other people around the world doing what I'm doing. And there will be millions of people after me who will pick up and keep building that cathedral, in the metaphor of the medieval times, when you would work on a project that you knew would take 200 years and you would never see the end result. And that ultimately is a leap of faith. And I think one of the great things about these kinds of meetings, and this one in particular because it's just been so incredibly intense and filled with heart, is that it reminds you that there are other people out there that are doing this. You're not alone. You're not just spinning your own wheels and spinning in the wind ultimately. So I think that's really one of the great things that I've had renewed in me through this process. So thank you to all.
I could just quickly quote Heschel for 1 second. Heschel says that faith is a seed planted in the depth of a lifetime.
Yeah, Tony just said something I've been trying to find words for. I think it's exactly the same way I feel. This is I think the third or fourth meeting in the last 6 months where I've really had that same feeling. Before this in June, it was a NOAA meeting with just administrators, wonderful people from DC and the agencies in New Hampshire, and before that it was an environmental aesthetics meeting in the middle of Finland. And it reminds me of this great passage in Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, passage of Leaves of Grass, where he talks about the crowd. It's fantastic. And it's this great secular vision of immortality, where he's sort of telling New Yorkers, right, and really all of us, you're part of this crowd, and I was part of this crowd, and after I'm gone, I'm still there with you, right, because we're just part of this organism that moves forward into the future, and that's definitely the way that I've sort of felt, is meeting new people, meeting people that I've known about, been reading for a long time, and not had a chance to meet before, and just feeling that sense of confidence, right, that there are so many people working on these things. And like Mitchell, I mean, my big thing is on community building, civic renewal, trying to find these connections, even if they're short-term or shallow, to attend to these problems right now. And I always think that there's a strong connection and integration between the short-term and the long-term, and I've come away from this meeting just feeling even stronger that that's true. The thing that I'll just say that I'm trying to find ways to think about this as well is like we've talked a lot about metaphor and imagery and all the sort of finding the right tools of showing people that they have a longer sort of a better sense of interest, of their own interests, that they ought to rely on in the future. And there's been a couple times in the meeting where that's sort of been compared to, advertising, right, and stuff that makes us all uncomfortable. And it struck me that the big difference between, forgive me, them and us, right, is that they don't care about the truth, right? They care about manipulation. It's what images are going to work to get people to buy, to get people to do whatever, to just get them to do what they want. And the difference between that and what we've been talking about, images and metaphor and rhetoric, is that we care about the truth, is that we're not willing to sort of take that, just do anything to get people to, jump on the bandwagon. And that, to me, has brought up a great sense of humility this week, is that when it's not just about manipulation, but it's about actually something deeper and stronger than that, I think we have to be really humble about whether we know what really is going to be most important in the long run. So that's what I'll go home and think about.
Susan?
I feel I walk away from this meeting with two really disturbing questions for me. One of them arose not just out of what the students said this morning, but it just really brought it to a point when they said, well, we don't have the power, you guys have the power, and we've been talking all week, well, we don't have the power, but they have the we always have apparently some sense of we are not the ones called for.
Yeah.
But we are. I mean, if not us, then who, so I guess the question that really comes out of that is, why do we keep avoiding taking our own power in acting on what we know? I mean, what is, and maybe I pick up again on this beautiful image for me that has been offered here before and mentioned by several. What is the gift that I bring, that you bring, that we now have to give? Sort of like we don't have the luxury of withholding. So that to me is one disturbing thing. And what's really following very closely to that is also, again, a word that was raised here, and that is, what's the boldest thing I could be doing when I get home? And I want to actually commit that I'm going to ask myself this question, but also I will ask every single person when I give a talk, I will ask them that question. Because it just feels like we need to be a lot bolder given the urgency, given where we are.
Thanks. Dave?
First of all, Susie's comment, and also Hal's, and I want to say three things. One is that back in the summer of 1980, I moved from where I was teaching at UNC to Arkansas, and it turned out, we operated a farm, it turned out it was the hottest summer recorded in Arkansas history. And the thermometer went over 100 degrees, 59 out of 60 days, no measurable rainfall from Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens blew off until late October. And I came, this kind of page out of David, your book, I came to climate change viscerally, somatically. I felt it. There'd be birds fall out of the sky, literally, with heart attacks. Trees died, wildfires. You felt it, you smelled it, it was there, and I still feel that. And so I came to the issue of climate change, and about that time, that George Woodwell, who'd written the first paper on climate change for Jimmy Carter in 1978. And so I came to it that way, but it was something I felt first before I thought about it.
What year was that?
That was 1980. And the very next year, we had the most severe rainfall. We had 16 inches of rain in 12 hours. And so climate destabilization was something I felt, I heard, I smelled, just lived through it. That was before I thought about it. On words, Hal, I think you're right. We need them, but we also need our silences and images and experiences. And I'm hearing that as a common thread really through all of us. And this is a brilliantly gifted group of words. Susie, your comment, I really like what you're saying, and I want to add one thing to it as a small footnote. What happens? What would we, if we could see ourselves in a larger perspective, what would it be like if all of a sudden we found out we were at the tipping point? When the wall fell in 1990, there was every conceivable contingency plan in the Pentagon for everything except one. What do we do if we win? And they didn't know, and we didn't know. And I think on this, a couple of weeks ago at Walmart in Bentonville, Al Gore was there talking to 800 people in Walmart, the corporate executives, and he got an 8-minute standing ovation. And I'll bet there weren't 2 Gore voters in 2000 in that room. Tipping point. I think we're there. And I think Susie's point, and the point a lot of you have made, is right on. Now is the time for boldness, it's leadership. This is the moment we're the people. This, I think we're closer to a global consensus and even a consensus in this country. Tony's graphs yesterday lack only somebody to stand up and begin to shape things. Nathan's point this morning about connections. I think it's obligatory on us to find those connections, because if we can find a connection, that's the leverage point. That's the point where small exertions are big changes. But Susie, I want to echo your comment about boldness, and what maybe we're closer to that tipping point than we can imagine. And I suspect we are.
We're running out of time.
Any last comments?
I have one.
I was going to go to the Cohen.
Okay. Just real quickly, as I've been talking to people throughout the week, many people have said to me that they have felt more stirred up at this meeting than a lot of meetings that they go to. And my comment was, well, try being in a room with the annual meeting of 300 psychoanalysts and see how stirred up you get.
Wow.
And so what I just want to take from my experience from that environment, as well as what I'm experiencing here with people, is when you leave here, don't fall under the spell of too much psychic stimulation, and let that cloud what might come through from the unconscious for your own imagery. Because when you're in a group of people, it can all get mixed in together. But when you go back alone and take it and maybe have your own dreams, that we're all looking for images here to hold things, but really the best ones come from your own unconscious and your own self. And to be able to use those as each of our own individual power, I think that that's a source of strength that I hope everybody gets a bit of and can take away from this meeting.
Thanks.
I'll just say one quick thing.
Yeah.
There were lots of things that was powerful and time here. The fact that the young people were here this morning, that was a different quality to this time together, and that seemed like a really good practice. It seems like picking up what you guys are saying, just looking at the future directly and feeling that. I mean, I was aware that so many questions came up looking at those young people, realizing they're in the same fever of ideas that we are. They're in the same nervousness of, why are we talking so much? Because we're all talking about ideas. And ideas are not particularly motivating in the same way that I just ask myself, do they have the stories? Do they have the stories that are helping them stay connected to nature? And do they have the stories that help them sort of live through this fever? And it was just powerful to kind of, with them, and for me that's what I'm going to carry away from this, is because my background, my area is education, is looking, trying to keep that image of looking at them in mind, realizing that that dialogue, that conversation is really important.
Don?
I only want to say I'm enormously grateful for to have been able to have this experience with all of you, and that I have a pretty introverted sense that I can't put words to right now, but I think when I go home, this experience is going to affect, I want to come back to that sense of urgency, but it's much more acute. It's going to affect how I live, how I think about my work, how I think about psychology, how I talk, and the voice I have, the voice I don't have, all of those things. And so it's just a lot that's working inside. That's what I'll be going home with.
I just would like to say, for me, I've learned a tremendous amount. But it's the connections with all of you that's really made this week. Meeting people that I wanted to meet, and having the chance to meet and connect. And also the challenges that have been created in me that I think, Veronica, you're right. The challenge that arose within me is, as I'm practiced in the science and conveying the science, and I think I'm still learning how the Jungian psychology fits and how it can help and support what's been going on, and how it can be articulated to the world. I think that's something that's I've realized that I need to do a lot more work on and reflect on. Okay, so I'm going to suggest we go to the room. It'll take me about 5 minutes to set the laptop up with the slideshow. And again, what we're going to do is watch the images. There will be, we're not going to discuss the images. These are the images that you've sent me. And after the final image, that'll be the conclusion of the workshop.
And I'd just like to, again, thank you all for coming, and to have a safe trip home.
Yeah.
And we need to thank John, too.
Yes.
For being a very gracious host.
There were things that weren't represented that needed to be represented. But I think there's 48 images, and other than those three, the other 45 came from participants. And I thank everybody for sending me their images. I just gave a copy of this to Sue, so if you'd like a copy of this, can they contact you, Sue? It's 37 megabytes, so it's not a huge file.
It's too big for me now.
I didn't put any music to this.
Oh no.
I'll send it to Hal and Marilyn, you can put music to this. I wonder if we could turn the lights on Rothenberg again. And so we'll just watch this show, and you'll know when the last image comes up, and that will be it.
How long does this last?
12 minutes.
12 minutes?
Jeff, is
Yeah.
there any way if we see something particularly striking that we want to linger on this a little bit to
You-
stop it or anything?
I've got it set up as a thematic show.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is that there is an image that really captures you. Here, you can get a copy of this and dwell on it.
That's pretty good.
This-
So far.
And just as a form, this is sort of in the order that I've received these through the last month. I didn't make an attempt to order them. Thank you again. Well, safe travels to all of you. And again, the whole committee thanks all of you for coming. And stay in touch. Will do.